I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I think we've got a full house already, which is great to see. So let me introduce myself. My name is Krista Johnson, and I'm the director of the Center for African Studies at Howard University. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. We have a special guest this afternoon, Professor Peter Mendy from Rhode Island College in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. He's going to be speaking on his most recent book, which is titled Amilcar Cabral, a Nationalist and Pan-Africanist Revolutionary. Professor Mendy is Professor of History and Africana Studies at Rhode Island College in Providence. And he was born, though, and grew up in the Gambia, but has strong roots to Guinea-Bissau and as well to Senegal. So a West African, definitely a Pan-African or West African for sure. His education was done in the United Kingdom. So both his BA, his MA, and his PhD were done in the United Kingdom. His PhD he holds in political science and West African studies from the University of Birmingham. His doctoral thesis was Portuguese colonialism in Africa, the tradition of resistance in Guinea-Bissau, 1879 to 1959. He subsequently turns that into a book. And in addition to that, of course, he has his latest book on Amilcar Cabral, but has also published numerous publications, including co-authoring a volume on a historical dictionary of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, and then has co-edited a volume, this is in French, Pluralisme politique en Guinée-Bissau, une transition encore. With his chapter, The Emergence of Political Pluralism in Guinea-Bissau. Dr. Mendy has lived in Guinea-Bissau for over 7 years and was both director and then deputy director and then director of the leading social science research institutes in Guinea-Bissau. He witnessed the country's transition from a one-party state to multi-party dispensation, economic liberalization, and implementation also of stringent structural adjustment programs. So he has firsthand, obviously, on the ground experience and knowledge in Guinea-Bissau. So his talk today will actually be, of course, on his book, but really also about the current politics and societal circumstances and conditions in Guinea-Bissau, which will be an interesting conversation in and of itself. Professor Mendy has been teaching at Rhode Island College since 2000, and his research fields are broad. They include civil-military relations in contemporary Africa, the military and politics in Guinea-Bissau, democratization processes in Lusophone Africa, elections and electoral processes in Lusophone Africa, and war and peace transitions in Lusophone Africa. So we're really delighted to have Professor Mendy come and speak with us here at the center. This was actually a talk that was scheduled for last spring, and it was supposed to be in person, but because of COVID, we've had to now do it in this virtual format. So I'm going to first hand over the floor to Professor Mendy and give him an opportunity to speak for about 30 minutes. Then I will come back and introduce our discussant for the afternoon, who is our Mr. Rene Odanga. So I will introduce him in a little bit, but let me please turn it over to Professor Mendy to give his talk now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Johnson, for that warm introduction and for kindly renewing the invitation by former director, Professor Mbai Cham, who invited me early this year to make an in-person presentation, as you just mentioned, but COVID-19 decided to be a malicious spoiler. I just want to acknowledge the family of Amilcar Cabral. I know some of them have joined or said will be joining. And to the distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I send my warmest greetings and thank you for joining this virtual presentation. I would also like to thank the discussant in advance, irrespective of his perspectives. I am honored to remotely present my book, Amilcar Cabral, a nationalist and Pan-Africanist revolutionary. But I would like to start with a quick PowerPoint presentation to provide a visual overview. Now, I'm going to try and see if I can upload it from here. Oh, and we can. So I don't know how it's showing on your end. Is it working at your end?
No, it is not
No.
yet.
Oh.
Did you hit the share screen button?
Okay, let me try again then. I did. I thought I did.
So once you hit the share screen button,
Okay.
You need to select which item to share.
Oh.
See, then you have to double click on that item.
Let me just try it again. How
there we
now?
go.
Okay.
Yes, that's
now we can see it.
Okay. So let's get this PowerPoint going. Okay, so that's just the title. So this is the historical figure that the book is about. Amilcar Cabral was born in Guinea-Bissau, in the interior, the eastern part of the country, in a town called Bafata in Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau, as you can see from the map, is wedged between Senegal to the north and the Republic of Guinea to the east and to the south, and the Atlantic Ocean to the west. It is a country with an archipelago of 88 islands here. And this was actually the house where Cabral was born on 24th September, on 12 September 1924. His parents, Cape Verde, were Cape Verdeans. The father was Juvenal Antonio Lopes the Costa Cabral, and the mother was Eva Pinal Evera. These are images of them and the young Amilcar Cabral. Cabral was born, the parents came from the Cape Verde Islands. The Cape Verde Islands, 10 islands, an archipelago of 10 islands off the coast of Senegal, about 400 miles from Senegal and 900 miles northwest from Bissau. This is the house that the father built, and Amilcar Cabral spent a brief time here when he left Guinea-Bissau at age 8 with his father to Cape Verde. Okay, let me stop there, and I might have to come back. Well, let me just continue because what I was planning. So Amilcar Cabral was very much inspired by the tradition of resistance in both these two settings. His land of birth, Portuguese Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, but also his land of ancestry, Cape Verde. And he famously articulated this by saying the resistance of the people of Guinea-Bissau, the people of Guinea and Cabo Verde has never ceased to manifest itself in revolts, passive resistance, mass emigration to neighboring countries, and total refusal to pay the taxes of domination. Our struggle is carrying on from there. Amilcar Cabral was understood the nature of colonial education, which he expressed as, he said, all Portuguese education disparages the African, his culture and his civilization. African languages are forbidden in schools. The white man is always presented as a superior being and the African as an inferior. The colonial conquistadors are shown as saints and heroes. As soon as African children enter elementary school, they develop an inferiority complex. So that function of colonial education was understood by Cabral, and Cabral was also made a distinction and clearly identify the enemy in this struggle for liberation. He famously said, our people make a distinction between the fascist colonial government and the people of Portugal. They are not fighting against the Portuguese people. And Amilcar Cabral was a very energetic, multitasking individual. He actually conducted the war. He was out in the front, as well as traveling the world, mobilizing, world opinion, securing both political, material, and diplomatic support. Here we see images of him in the field with his soldiers. Cabral was very much involved in and concerned about the situation of women. Women took an active part in the liberation struggle. They were not just carriers of weapons. They did that too, but much more important, they were frontline soldiers as well. So here you see a picture of him with some women fighters. Cabral conducted the war with incredible honesty. He said, hide nothing from the masses of our people. He tells his fighters and his comrades, tell no lies, expose lies wherever they are told, mask no difficulties, mistakes, failures, claim no easy victories. And he demonstrated solidarity with what he called every just cause. He said, we in the conference of the nationalist organizations of the Portuguese colonies, which he was the face and the voice of this united front against Portuguese colonialism, he said, we are fiercely in solidarity with every just cause. In the case of the civil rights movement here, he said, we are with the Blacks of North America. We are with them in the streets of Los Angeles. And when they are deprived of all possibility of life, we suffer with them. Amilcar Cabral linked the struggle against Portuguese colonialism with the struggle of the people of Portugal to end their subjugation to the dictatorship. He said, while the fall of fascism in Portugal might not lead to the end of Portuguese colonialism, we are certain that the elimination of Portuguese colonialism will bring about the destruction of Portuguese fascism. Through our liberation struggle, we are making an effective contribution towards the defeat of Portuguese fascism and giving the Portuguese people the best possible proof of our solidarity. Very prophetic, because the war in Guinea-Bissau, the war in the colonies, would actually end up liberating the Portuguese people, perhaps unprecedented in history, where a people fighting against the colonial oppressors would end up freeing the people of the in the metropolis, in the colonizing country, particularly if that colonizing country is a dictatorship. So Cabral was able to, the war in Guinea-Bissau actually got to a point where the soldiers themselves, war fatigued, some of them began to sympathize with the course of the liberation war. And what became the armed forces movement that ended the 48 years of dictatorship in Portugal actually started in Guinea-Bissau. It was in Guinea-Bissau that soldiers got together and decided to end the war. When they returned to Portugal, they were the ones who organized what is called the revolution in Portugal that ended the war. But here we get a statement by the armed forces movement that says, "We Portuguese military troops who were sent to a war we did not understand or support have in our hands a unique opportunity to repair the crimes of fascism and colonialism, to set up the basis for a new fraternal cooperation between the peoples of Portugal and Guinea." So the war, Guinea-Bissau was critical. The war in Guinea-Bissau actually was more intensive, and it was in Guinea-Bissau that Portugal was decisively defeated. So it ended with Guinea-Bissau declaring unilaterally declaring independence on 24th September 1973, followed by Mozambique on 25th June 1975, in Cape Verde on 5th July 1975, and São Tomé and Príncipe 12th July 1975, finally in Angola on 11th November 1975. Okay, so let me stop there, and just wanted to say and continue with the presentation. So a lot has been written about Amilcar Cabral. So obviously my book on Cabral is not the first publication on this great historical figure. Since the landmark publication of Basil Davidson's book, The Liberation of Guinea, Aspects of an African Revolution in 1969, publications in English about Cabral's ideas, accomplishments, and legacy have grown substantially. Some of the critically acclaimed studies in English include Amilcar Cabral, Revolutionary Leadership and People's War by Patrick Chaval in 1983, Amilcar Cabral's Revolutionary Theory and Practice, a Critical Guide in 1991, and Ronald Chilcott's, but that was by Ronald Chilcott, excuse me, and Warriors at Work, How Guinea Was Really Set Free by Mustafa Dada in 1993. Now, my book is a contribution to the Ohio University series on African leaders of the 20th century. The series aims to introduce college students and general readers to the great African leaders of the last century, leaders who demonstrated exemplary leadership qualities in liberating and governing their peoples, leaders whose ideas still resonate in the continent today. Now, the biographies in the series are meant to be concise, readable, and accessible. there are not revised doctoral theses. Focus on leadership is apt and timely, given the persistent crisis of leadership in post-independence Africa, a chronic crisis that has devastated and continues to destroy lives and livelihoods in too many African countries. Defining the meaning of leader, John Quincy Adams, the 6th president of the United States, famously stated, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader." By this definition, the biographic profile sketched out in the pages of my book amply qualifies Cabral as an inspirational and motivational leader. Charismatic and visionary, Cabral was a genius at mobilizing and inspiring his fellow compatriots to engage in selfless, high-risk, and life-threatening activities. Cabral was not only a great African leader of the last century, but according to 5,000 readers of the BBC World Histories magazine that came out in February 2020, this year, he is the second greatest, he's considered the second greatest leader of all time. This is after Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the 19th century ruler of this Sikh empire. Cabral was voted second from a list of 20 leaders in world history nominated by historians. Professor Hakim Adi of Chichester University in the UK, who nominated him. Leaders including Egyptian Pharaoh Amenhotep III, Roman Catholic Pope Innocent III, African Emperor Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire, European monarchs including Catherine the Great of Russia and Queen Elizabeth I of England, US President Abraham Lincoln, and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. One of the most important criteria stipulated for great leader was, quote, someone who exercised power and had a positive impact on humanity. While 5,000, I'm sorry, while the 5,000 BBC magazine readers are not a globally representative sample, the survey result still reflects the significance of Amilcar Cabral as a leader on the world stage. Cabral was an agronomist, a nationalist, a Pan-Africanist, and an outspoken internationalist in solidarity with every just cause, as he put it. A prolific writer, his scientific publications include voluminous studies on agronomy and agriculture, while his political works, mainly in Portuguese, also comprise several English language publications, including Revolution in Guinea and African People's Struggle and Unity and Struggle. A Marxist revolutionary theorist, Cabral critiqued the concept of class and insisted on, quote, the existence of history before the class struggle, to challenge and reject the notion that the colonized are, quote, people without history. An engaged intellectual and revolutionary, Cabral remains as significant as his famous contemporaries on the world stage, including Mao Zedong, Frantz Fanon, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Fidel Castro, and Che Guevara, to whom he has been, in my opinion, simplistically likened and even referred to as the Che Guevara of Africa. Now, while Cabral and Guevara were close ideological comrades, they had different perspectives on revolutionary principles and practices. Fundamentally, Cabral did not believe in the export of revolution, a position he articulated clearly at the 1966 Tricontinental Meeting of Fellow Revolutionaries in Havana, Cuba, when he declared, I quote, "However great the similarity between our cases and however identical our enemies, national liberation and social revolution are not exportable commodities." Cabral insisted on contextual specificity. Briefly, this biography of Cabral narrates the life of a man born in a Portuguese colonial outpost called Guinea-Portuguesa or Portuguese Guinea 96 years ago, who would become the most prominent founding father of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. The book also tells the story of Cabral's active engagement in the anti-colonial struggles against Portugal that secured independence for Angola, Mozambique, and São Tomé and Príncipe. The accumulative impacts of the transformative developments generated by Cabral's effective leadership contributed significantly to the collapse of 48 years of brutal fascist dictatorship in Portugal called the Estado Novo. The narrative provides critical perspective on Cabral's accomplishments and the multiple contexts in which he lived and the struggles to overcome the enormous challenges he faced. In narrating the story of Cabral, I have tried to contextualize the major developments in his life. Chapters 1 and 2 examine the two critical settings in which Amilcar Cabral was born and raised. First, the background of ongoing wars of conquest in Portuguese Guinea, where he was born on 12 September 1924 in the town of Bafata. While the Portuguese presence in the territory dates back to the 15th century, effective colonial domination was only achieved in the early years of the 20th century. 9 years before Cabral was born, Portugal finally conquered the mainland of the territory in 1915, but still had another 21 years to subjugate the inhabitants of the adjacent 88-island Bijagos archipelago. That was 12 years after Cabral was born. Secondly, the post-slavery colonial situation in Cabo Verde. In Cape Verde, the 10-island archipelago settled by the Portuguese in the mid-15th century, where they established the first slave plantation society in the tropics, which became the model for the Americas. Slavery was finally abolished in Cape Verde in 1878. I did something here, I shouldn't do. And poor in natural resources and plagued by centuries of periodic droughts, famines, and spectacular deaths, exploitation and callous neglect by Portugal, the incredibly resilient people of the archipelago of Cape Verde resisted the best way they could, with revolts, rebellions, and migrations, which created the large Cape Verdean diaspora in Africa, Europe, and the Americas. With the highest literacy rate in Portugal's African empire, 22%, for example, in 1950, compared to 3% in Angola, 2% in Mozambique, and 1% in Portuguese Guinea, with a seminary built in 1866 and a high school with large Cape Verdean faculty, but limited employment opportunities. The Portuguese recruited a significant number of educated Cape Verdeans into the colonial service of Guinea-Bissau, and to a limited extent in Angola. So it was in search of better employment opportunities that both parents of Amilcar Cabral found themselves in Portuguese Guinea in the early years of the 20th century. I discuss Cabral's primary and secondary education in Cape Verde, and as an active high school student, his involvement with a literacy movement called Claridad that influenced him to write poems and prose in which he critically commented on the harsh environmental and colonial realities. So the chapters that follow chronologically looks at Cabral's development from university in Portugal, where he arrived in 1945. His involvement in the clandestine political activity, student political activity, but also with other African students, including Agostinho Neto of Angola, Marcelino dos Santos, who died recently, of Mozambique. Cabral would become very engaged in political activities. I delve into his deepening political consciousness and radicalization. And in the third chapter, I look at Cabral's return to his country of birth 20 years later in Portuguese Guinea, and his work as an agronomist. He studied agronomy in Portugal, but also his clandestine work to try to raise political consciousness in Guinea-Bissau by organizing a sport and recreation club for young people. So the Portuguese would discover his activities, and when he is medically evacuated to Portugal because he had a heavy dose of malaria, he is actually, his employment is terminated, so he does not return. In chapter 5, I look at his decision to engage fully in armed liberation struggle. In chapter 6, I discuss the launch War of Independence in January 1963. In chapter 7, I highlight his active engagement in Pan-African politics and his unfailing demonstration of solidarity with what he calls every just cause in the world, from the Vietnam conflict to the Congo crisis to the civil rights struggles here in the United States. In chapter 8, I discuss the circumstances surrounding his assassination by one of his disgruntled fighters with the deep complicity of the Portuguese. Chapter 9, I analyze the redoubled efforts of the Portuguese in the wake of the loss of its charismatic leader to complete the liberation of Portuguese Guinea. And in chapter 9, I look at, in the final chapter, I look at the legacy of Cabral as the most prominent founding father of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, whose ideas about national liberation beyond flag independence remain pertinent in contemporary Africa. So I think my time is, I will stop there. And we can pick it up later.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a good, I guess, pause point for the time being. Thank you very much, Professor Mendy. So we're interested actually in delving a little bit more into the substance and meat of your book, and then of course bringing it up into a bit of the contemporary significance really of Cabral and understanding, I think, some of the contemporary political conditions in Guinea-Bissau. I wanted, though, to, I guess, facilitate some of that and to get us going there, to introduce our discussant for today, who is Rene Odanga. He will serve as our discussant, and he's a master's student in the Department of African Studies here at Howard University, a second-year master's student, so he's finishing up, hopefully, soon. His research focuses on East African state history and thematic cultural expressions in African literature. He's received his BA in International Relations from the United States International University. Hails from East Africa, but again, has a lot of interest in Amilcar Cabral, and as of course do most of us. So I'll turn it over to you, Rene, if you can perhaps give us your impressions of the book and really what stood out for you, and then also facilitate some of the Q&A. And then I'll also, just a reminder I'll come back on probably, but just a reminder to the audience, it's best to probably put your questions and answers in the chat. We're using the chat function for that. If you do have a question that you want to ask, if you can just flag us, and then I can come on and actually ask you to then unmute your mic. Thanks, Rene, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Mendy, as I mentioned earlier, it's very nice to meet you, and I'm very grateful for the work that you put into the book. Now, I have 10 questions, but I'll only ask 3, if only for the purpose of time. It is 10 questions for every chapter in the book, but I'll only ask 3 of them, and I'll delineate them along the duties that you wanted to prove with the book. That one, Amilcar Cabral competently organized and led one of Africa's most consequential armed liberation struggles. And so on that, and with the 4th one, that he wrote incisive essays and innovative books that still resonate today, I wanted to ask you, because you'd mentioned that from the very beginning, I think it is in chapter 2, that Guinea-Bissau, which was then called Portuguese Guinea, had multiple ethnic groups and peoples who have more in common than the sum total of their differences. The large swathing of ethnic communities in Guinea-Bissau, they have more in common than the sum total of their differences. Yet the Portuguese imperialists were still able to amass these differences and use them to split them, such that we see even later on during the struggle, Amilcar Cabral is still finding challenges, surpassing these engineered differences that the Portuguese had been able to play off each community against each other. Now, why was this possible to begin with? And 2, if you could also speak about that with the differences that were cultivated between Cabo Verdeans and Guinea-Bissau and people in Guinea-Bissau, and if you could make it contemporary as well, because as a student of African studies, I would say Africans have qualitatively less differences than we have in common. We have more in common quantitatively than whatever sum total of our differences. Yet this still seems to be a problem that we face in trying to amass a Pan-Africanist struggle or a united front against underdevelopment and so on. So if you could, how can Pan-Africanists endeavor to rise above this?
Yes, okay. Regarding your first question, has to do with the policy of assimilation, which the Portuguese use as a tactic of divide and rule. The policy of assimilation was applied to Guinea-Bissau, or Portuguese Guinea, Angola, and Mozambique, and Cape Verde was exempted. That was a very effective instrument of divide and rule. So the Cape Verdeans, because again of manpower shortage, Portugal is trying to prevail over huge territories in Africa. Angola is 14 times the size of Portugal, and not to speak of Mozambique. All right. So it does not have the manpower. So it uses Cape Verdeans in Guinea-Bissau, and to do that effectively, this policy of divide and rule is deployed. And so it exaggerates the differences. It gives us the Cape Verdeans, but we have to be careful. Even though Cape Verdeans were considered civilized and assimilated, okay, there are two types of Cape Verdeans that we find in Guinea-Bissau. There are the poor Cape Verdeans who have very strong connection with the people. And then there are the educated Cape Verdeans recruited by the Portuguese in the colonial service, who have to implement the colonial policies of the Portuguese. The statistics are very clear. At one point, you have over 60% of the colonial officials in Guinea-Bissau are Cape Verdeans. And that's problematic, because Portuguese colonialism, like all colonialism, was very harsh. But because Portugal was a dictatorship from 1926, it was already hard on the people of Portugal. The regime in Portugal was harsh on the people of Portugal. We cannot expect it to be any less so in the colonies. And the people that are implementing those harsh measures in the colonies are mainly Cape Verdeans. All right. So the Cape Verdean colonial officials, because they are the ones in closest contact with the ordinary people. They are the ones that enforce, that collect taxes, that enforced, forced labor and all the harsh measures. So yes, it brings this, it actually exaggerates the antagonism between Guineans and Cape Verdeans. And that will remain even after independence. I'm sorry, I forgot the other point that you made, which was?
I wanted you now to contemporize that and bring it to extrapolate it to all of Africa today, where that might still seem to be the case.
Well, actually, that antagonism would be reflected in the liberation movement. You have this liberation movement, the African Party of Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. All right, it is created by Amilcar Cabral with Guinean and Cape Verdean nationalists. So it is a binational liberation movement dedicated to liberating both countries, okay? Because again, Amilcar Cabral has this binationalism, born in Guinea-Bissau, of Cape Verdean parents. Now, that reality of this binationalism it becomes a problem during the War of Liberation. Right? We see you have a situation where the leadership of the PAIGC is Cape Verdean, because Cape Verde was the main beneficiary of the little colonial education that was provided. So the leaders of the PAIGC, the educated leaders of the PAIGC, including Amilcar Cabral, was of Cape Verdean origins. And so at the same time, you have that antagonism, because this is happening during the colonial period. You have the Cape Verdeans who are playing this very important role in maintaining the colonial status quo. And you have this nationalist organization that is led by Cape Verdeans. and the frictions are there. And so the Portuguese are able to exploit that, and that would lead to the assassination of Amilcar Cabral. And again, after independence, it's that difference plays out to the 1980 coup d'etat, in which Amilcar Cabral's brother is overthrown, and that would lead to the separation. The whole struggle was predicated on the unification of these two countries, and they would separate with the 1980 coup.
Okay, a little bit further. I think this is my last question. No, it won't be, but the concept of class delineations that you speak about, I think it's in chapter 5.
The concept of what?
Class delineations, class struggle. While other African intellectuals and leaders, political leaders, liberation leaders like Sekou Touré, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere had avoided in their theorizations of African struggles the concept of class being a foundational unit of organization. They argued more around ethnic lines, religion, age even. Amilcar Cabral doesn't shy away from this. He says, yes, African societies have been stratified along class lines.
Right.
Then he says, in order for the liberation struggle to move, the middle class, the petite bourgeoisie, needs to commit class suicide. Could you please speak a bit more about that?
Sure, and that is that partly explains the failure of this project. You know, committing class suicide means identifying with the cause, with the cause of the liberation, with the victims, you know, of colonization itself. And so, yes, Cabral does not shy from Marx's analysis of the situation. And so we find he refers to class, even though he does question some aspects, as I mentioned earlier, of Marxism itself, of class struggle, but certainly in Guinea-Bissau, Cabral does emphasize that that aspect of Marxism.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to move on to the Q&A session of the presentation.
Okay.
Am I going to do it, or is Dr. Johnson going to do it?
Sorry, Rene, I'm going to let you do this.
Okay. Okay.
Are you able to see the questions coming in?
Yes, I'm able to see them. I'm able to see them. There is someone who had asked on the importance of departing from the need to compare Cabral to other leaders, for example, Mansa Musa or Che Guevara or Kwame Nkrumah. Would it be better to understand him if we just saw him as Amilcar Cabral without comparing him to anybody else?
Yes, indeed. I think that's a useful thing to do. He was unique, but invariably people tend to compare leaders in order to bring out the uniqueness about them. I think it is in that sense that I, for example, mentioned the difference between him and Che Guevara, for example.
Also, someone was asking, it is very interesting how Cabral is viewed, because the revolution was not only an intellectual one, as you mentioned,
sure,
but a political one as well.
And a cultural
and an armed one. Do you believe that it is the fact that it was so multidimensional that made it a bit more successful?
Yes, I think particularly the emphasis on culture. Yes, because it was multidimensional. It was not flag independence, yes, that is what makes it that much more important, a revolution.
There was a question as well about Amilcar's intellectual corpus, slants,
Mm-hmm.
and their relationship to negritude, the movements of negritude. You had mentioned in the book about his dalliances with Présence Africaine, Alioune Diop, and the likes. Please speak a bit more about that as well. I've had the pleasure to read the book. Everybody else hasn't.
Yes, I think he saw the limitation of cultural nationalism, and so he was more interested in total liberation. So yes, he embraced some aspects of negritude. He was definitely a Pan-Africanist, but qualified his Pan-Africanism. It's the Pan-Africanism from bottom up rather than top down. It's about solidarity of the peoples rather than a club of the elite, or solidarity amongst the elite.
Okay, I have to ask this question from Dr. Plummer. Would you please share your perspectives on Cabral's approach to cultural resistance and culture as a tool for resistance? Because you can't help but think of Cabral's understanding of the power of culture as a mobilizing tool, that is a feature that we have seen in contemporary politics. And if I were just to add an addendum to that, you mentioned somewhere that he spoke about the literature and poetry of the age being resigned either to hopefulness or to pessimism, and that he saw that would only lead to stagnation. So could you speak about culture and its optimism or pessimism, and how it can be harnessed in contemporary politics globally?
Yeah, Cabral puts a lot of importance to culture, especially in a situation where you have the dominant colonial culture. So culture itself is a weapon of liberation, but he makes a distinction between culture that actually oppresses the people and culture that is liberating. Culture is useful in the fight against foreign domination. So in that sense, culture plays a very important role for Cabral.
Okay. How would you assess the overall success or failure of the revolution in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde?
The revolution died with Cabral. After Cabral, it became, again, the context here is very important. Cabral is assassinated in 1973. 9 months later, the country becomes independent. Now, it is at a time when there's also economic crisis with the oil embargo that plunges the world, into a recession. And so when you take the whole, when you look at the whole picture, it's a difficult time for a newborn nation. Now, again, it questions the commitment of the leadership, the people that took over from Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral was really this towering figure that was clear about the objectives of the revolution. And with his death, his followers, they are almost in disarray. They hurriedly gather together. Independence is declared. A new nation comes into being, but it is struggling. And again, the ideological rivalry between East and West, the Cold War impacts the situation in Guinea-Bissau, as well as in other African countries. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, Guinea-Bissau was a country, when it was fighting for its independence, the Soviet Union played a very important part. The Eastern Bloc countries played a very important part. And so with the end of the Cold War, with the triumphalism that emerged with the West, particularly the United States, and the conditionalism that are attached, Guinea-Bissau, it impacts the leaders of Guinea-Bissau as well as other countries. But in the case of Guinea-Bissau, it is serious. And you find Cabral, the agenda is abandoned. Institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, they come out with economic and political conditionalities, to access, development funds, and it has an impact.
Okay, Professor Lagmia has a question for you. I don't know if Professor Lagmia.
Mute myself. Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
All right. I'm from Cameroon.
Okay.
I really want to thank you so much for this presentation.
Thank you.
Because it has made me to realize that the achievement of Cabral was also something that we did not anticipate when we were fighting the French in Cameroon.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of also changing the minds of Portuguese in Portugal. This is really quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
My worry is, why is now, I'm just asking you this question now as a scholar who is looking at Africa, not only what Cabral did, because you said the revolution died with him. Presenting and writing a book like this in 2020 for young people in Africa, for people now to see that this guy fought the war of liberation, but we are still incarcerated, mentally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And the revolution died with him. As I'm speaking with you, Bobby Wine has been arrested in Uganda.
Yes.
Patrice Lumumba started something like that, but he was killed in Zaire.
Mm-hmm.
Walter Rodney started something like that. He was killed and it all went with it. Where is the future? I am saying this again because in Cameroon right now, those revolutionary leaders that want to follow the footsteps of Cabral are being killed by French forces from France. And so they have not succeeded to change the French mind. The same thing in Cote d'Ivoire. Yes. So we are still incarcerated in Africa. These leaders came and went, but we are still mentally incarcerated. We call ourselves Pan-Africanists, but the continent now is Channelization. It's now China. I want you as an author to give us some limelight, using the footprint of Cabral to see where is the future for us. It's good to publish the book we read, but we need to see where we are getting to with this continent that we love so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important point. I think no matter how difficult the situation is, and no doubt hopelessness, the sense of hopelessness fills most of us, but the inspiration is there, and we cannot lose hope. We have inspirational leaders in the past. You've mentioned them. Cabral, of course, is one of them. Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah. Their ideas must be kept alive. And so no matter how long it takes, a generation will emerge that will carry the struggle. I'm a born optimist. I think, yes, the situation is really critical, has been critical for a long time, but I think progressive forces cannot just, give up. The struggle continues. I mean, I know that sounds like a cliche, but we do have the inspiration is there. Cabral, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, they provide the inspiration. They are our source of inspiration.
I'm just going to go back to Dr. Cham's question, because now that you brought up the issue of a cultural regeneration as an inspiration for, I'm just going to read it out again. Your focus on Cabral's concepts and practices of culture, which he privileges in any process of liberation, brings interesting new perspectives on dominant accounts of African literary and cultural history. The accounts of the thoughts and practices of those who congregated around the Claridade, Cabo Verdeanidade, Certeza movements bring to mind similar trends in negritude and similar ideologies of culture. So what exactly were his views of negritude, and as Dr. Langme just asked, how the dignification of Africans can change the minds of Portugal, France, and China, in a sense?
Yeah, I think with Claridad, for example, Cabral saw their value, but he also saw their limitation. And he pointed out those limitations. And it's okay, the cultural nationalism is okay, but it's not enough. All right. So yeah, culture is very important, but it also has to be accompanied with political action. And it's got to be liberating.
Thank you. There's a question from Amadou Guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, good evening, Prof. Mendy.
Good evening.
We are very proud of you as a Gambian, having this expertise on one of the most important figures, historical figures of our continent, and having been so eloquently discussed about Amilcar Cabral and his history and the legacy that he's left behind. So we thank you so much, Prof. Mendy, I haven't yet grabbed a copy of your book, but I'm looking forward to doing so. And I'm sure a lot of our Gambian compatriots here and in the diaspora, as well as other Africans, of course, will be very much interested to review it. So we thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. We are proud of you.
Thank you.
I just have two questions or commentary to this brilliant topic that you've very competently addressed so far. One is, you mentioned about the demise of the struggle that Amilcar Cabral was waging after his death, leading even to the separation of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. He was trying to bring them together, and even he was looking forward towards a greater Pan-African unity. What lessons, are there any lessons that we can draw from that, so that in the demise of such a towering leader, as you called him, leading very competently for a very long time, that the struggle that he left behind, he didn't own it. He wanted to free his people.
Sure.
That it doesn't suffer, but can continue and be sustained. My first question is, are there lessons that we can learn? And the second one, and final one, of course, is looking forward. Africa, it looks like Africa hasn't moved anywhere in terms of progress since Cabral's demise. We're still under the tutelage and control of imperialism. We're still largely economically and financially not sovereign in any way, in order to be able to determine the policies, the finance, the capital, the foreign affairs, foreign policy, and et cetera, et cetera. We still cannot control any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you've mentioned that Amilcar Cabral was very much a Pan-Africanist who was looking forward not just to uniting Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, but the whole African continent. So today, given even the example of Guinea-Bissau and Cabral and Cape Verde not being able to move out of these shackles and be fully sovereign, probably because they're small, they're tiny, they're isolated, with regard to the large African continent. Do you think that it's important now for us to chart a new Pan-African agenda that Cabral was looking for? He did not reach there, but we all know that he was involved in the struggle continentally, not just in the other Portuguese colonies, but working very closely in solidarity with all the other progressive revolutionary leaders of Africa. So we know what his goal was. What should we do today to revive, these legacies of Cabral, these ideas, and make sure that Africa becomes free, completely liberated, and be able to chart our own destiny, having attained our full sovereignty? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you've asked some very, very profound questions. Let me take your last question first. The dependency of Africa, the continued, the deteriorating conditions in Africa, it's very important. It's very serious. What needs to be done, in my opinion, I think, is to continue to, to divulge, to spread the ideas of these progressive African leaders that we have, people like Cabral and Kwame Nkrumah. It's a challenging time for progressive elements around the world. And so it's not time. We cannot afford, progressive forces cannot afford to give up in the face of this seemingly overwhelming, all-powerful forces. So it's the old cliche, a luta continua, the struggle continues. So Cabral, his example is inspirational. He was not only concerned with the Portuguese colonies, he played a very important role, not only in Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde, but particularly he was a founding member of the MPLA. He worked very closely. In fact, he was the face and voice of the movement in the Portuguese colonies. But he was also in solidarity with all the other progressive forces. He was close to Kwame Nkrumah. They had a very close relationship. So it's about not losing the message. It's about keeping the fight, no matter how difficult the going gets. So that's my take on that second question. Now, the first one, the lessons, if I get that right, the lessons to be learned. Would you mind just repeating that again? The first question.
Yes, the first one was, just to ask what lessons may be learned from the the scenario in Guinea-Bissau where a towering leader as Cabral, died, and then the struggle suffered and could not continue.
Right. Yeah. The lessons to be learned is first of all, I think the degree of politicization, the involvement of the people at the grassroots level. You know, Cabral put a lot of emphasis on political education. You know, and when he died, one of the casualties of that in the schools, they used to have a discipline called political militancy. You know, they don't have that anymore. In the schools, very little is taught about Cabral and his ideas. So it's about you know, keeping these ideas alive. You know, these are liberating ideas that must be kept alive. But it has to be grassroots, you know, because top-down history has shown that it's not sustainable. It's got to have roots. It's got to be firmly based, you know. So I think that is what is missing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was going to add, and that has to be done in solidarity. We cannot see borders in Africa. So what is happening in Guinea-Bissau must have, you know, must connect to what is happening in Ghana and Zimbabwe and, you know, Botswana, you know, and South Africa. So that spirit of Pan-Africanism has to be kept alive, because Cabral was a nationalist, but more so a Pan-Africanist. He saw the total picture, you know, because focusing on just one part of Africa is part of the problem. So what we have today as the African Union, we see where we're going with that.
Yeah, if I may just add a little bit there, with the permission of the host and yourself. This is very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Oh, it was just a short one, very short.
I'm trying to save time for Dr. Cham before we run out of time.
Okay, or can I come with that after Dr. Cham's presentation then?
If we have time.
But
sure.
this was about the way forward. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Cham, please.
Okay, thank you, Rene. Thank you, Peter. That was really wonderful. I just want to follow up on some of the remarks that were made earlier, especially by my compatriot Saiba Suso, who asks, how do we explain this series of political instability that has followed the independence in Guinea-Bissau since independence, you know? And I want to tie that up to the fact that, I mean, if you look at Cabo Verde, you have one of the compatriots of Cabral, Pedro Pires, you know, who emerged as a leader in Cabo Verde and ran things to the point where his performance was really celebrated with this Mo Ibrahim Prize, you know, which is really one of those top prizes that exist in Africa, given by Africans based on a number of criteria there. So one can think in terms of a relative success in Cabo Verde, as opposed to, and stability, so to speak, as opposed to what we see unfolding in Guinea-Bissau over the past 20 years or so. So I want to ask if one might, I mean, how would you explain these divergent fortunes of Cabo Verde and Guinea-Bissau, you know, over the past 20 years or so? And would you say that perhaps through people like Pires, you know, some of the ideals of Cabral that died in Guinea-Bissau were sort of continued, that they had a staying power in Cabo Verde, which to some extent might account for the relative success in Cabo Verde as opposed to in Guinea-Bissau. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Cham. I think those are very important points. In Guinea-Bissau, the situation, in spite of the similarities, was different. Guinea-Bissau was the core of this struggle for liberation. And Cape Verdeans were involved, but again, as I explained earlier, the position of Cape Verdeans as colonial functionaries made it very difficult. And Cabral really was this charismatic figure that was able to bridge that gap. All right. He was also suspected, you know, and he had a lot of problems in trying to mobilize. So he was trying to keep, if you like, contain this antagonism between Guineans and Cape Verdeans. And it's not surprised that after his death, you know, the thing explodes out of control. In Cape Verde too, there was a resistance to the idea of you know, unification with Guinea-Bissau. The PAIGC was able to establish control in Cabo Verde. It met resistance, not as strong as in Guinea-Bissau, where you had, you know, a political opposition. It turned out to be ineffective in the end. This is the FLING, the Front for the Liberation of Guinea. But it became a spent force by the end of the war. So Cape Verde is a more cohesive society. You don't have the antagonisms, the divisions, you know, that you had in Guinea-Bissau. Over 30 different ethnic groups, which the Portuguese exploited during their time there, setting one ethnic group against the other. And then on top of that, you have the Cape Verdeans that were brought in and, you know, given given special privileges as colonial officials. So it's a difficult situation. It was relatively easy for Cape Verdeans. They don't have ethnic divisions, and they for a long time had this strong sense of Cape Verdeanness, you know, which enabled them to, in spite of their differences, which never exploded into war, to get things done. So for the first 75 to the 1990s, you know, the PAIGC was able to keep things under control, you know, and then in 1980, of course, it becomes the PAICV, a continuation of the PAIGC. But they had mass support because they didn't have the ethnic divisions. Yes, there's some regionalism between the islands, but their sense of Cape Verdeanness was much, much stronger than you had in Guinea-Bissau. Keep in mind that Guinea-Bissau was not conquered by the Portuguese until the mainland was conquered in 1915, and the adjacent islands in 1936. So effective Portuguese domination of Guinea-Bissau was very short-lived. You know? And so it's a different situation. This sense of Guineanness is much weaker than the sense of Cape Verdeanness. In spite of their differences that varied from island to island, they had a much stronger sense of what is called Cape Verdeanidad or Cape Verdeanness. So that made it easier for things to develop in spite of the opposition. The PAIGC, Pedro Pires, I mean, they were voted out of power in 1991, you know, and then they had to struggle to come back. And it was when Pedro Pires, as president, was able, you know, to make progress and won this prize, the Mo Abraham Prize. So the differences between the two countries is very important. Multi-ethnic, the divisions that had been, you know, exploited during the colonial period by the Portuguese, you did not have that in Cape Verde. So that's a very important difference. Why the Cape Verdeans were much more, they were able to make more progress because they are a more unified people in spite of the differences between the islands than you had in Guinea-Bissau.
Okay. I think we'll just move to Dr. Mendy, your last words, because we are out of time for the question and answer, and then I'll leave it over to Dr. Johnson to summarize it. So in like 5 minutes, your final words, and then Dr. Johnson will wrap it up.
Okay. So the project failed in Guinea-Bissau. The unification project failed. And Guinea-Bissau, with the coup in 1980, the separation between Cabo Verde, Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau. And then the country now goes through very, very difficult time economically and politically. The 1990s, you know, with 1994, multipartyism is imposed from outside, the conditionalities of the World Bank. And so now you have multi-party politics, but it's not democracy. You know, Guinea-Bissau goes through a very turbulent period until 2014. So from 1994 until 2014, there was not one government or a president that completed its constitutional term in office. It became a very turbulent, a very unstable country. And the country is still going through political instability.
Professor Mendy, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm just moving to another room quickly because there was too much noise there.
Okay.
I want to thank you for this wonderful talk. I don't know if you've been seeing all of the conversations in the chat. I think we captured much of what was being said, but there was a rich discussion. Obviously, you have sparked a lot of interest. Understandably so, right? I think it's really quite interesting to see how people are looking to the past to provide us with some hope and some direction for the future. And certainly, as you yourself have said, Amilcar Cabral is certainly one of those figures that we should look to, and whose teachings, whose books and whose lessons really can provide certain seeds for understanding what directions we need to move in the future. So we really want to thank you again for coming to speak with us here at the center. I know everyone has enjoyed the discussion, and I hope that once we do get out of this COVID era that we're in, we can actually physically bring you to Howard and to the center. It's really always a pleasure to engage, especially in with Lusophone Africa. I don't know if you must have known our good Professor Luis Serapiao in our department, who retired a few years ago, and so then since then it feels like we have a bit of a void in our department and in our program from the Lusophone angle. So it would be very nice to bring you back again to bring that element into our discussions. So again, I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening, and thank everyone else as well for coming. This session has been recorded, and it will be posted on our web page. This is also International Education Week, and many of the Howard faculty and Africanist faculty in general are engaged in the African Studies Association meeting, which starts tomorrow. So there's a lot of activity going on. Please do check us out on social media and Facebook, Twitter, and on our webpage to see about our upcoming events. And if you don't receive our newsletter, which has a lot of information on it with regards to our programming, please go to the web page and sign up for our newsletter as well. Professor Mendy, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I am familiar with your institution. I was an external examiner, and I actually stayed with Professor Lewis.
Yes.
Yes, so I know him quite well. and of course, my compatriot, Dr. Mbai.
Yes.
So I do. I would definitely, I look forward to coming back to Howard, and thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity, to talk about my book. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. And we did also put the link to the Amazon page where you could, the book is very available, and so there's a link actually to where you can purchase it on Amazon.com, and encourage everyone to go out and read it.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.